A senator warns that federal enforcement may be crossing into something far more dangerous, raising urgent questions about elections, civil liberties, and public trust in law enforcement.
I cede. I return.
All right, Senator Slotkin.
Thank you. Thank you for being here. I personally think that Secretary Noem should be here. You want the big job, you have the big accountability, and we should be seeing the Secretary of Homeland Security coming in front of the American people and certainly the Oversight Committee when we have such existential issues about the deployment of federal force in our country going on. But you are here in her place. And I think, you know, if we rewound the tape to a year and a half ago or a year plus ago, you had a lot of Americans who felt very strongly that if you were here illegally, especially if you were involved in any kind of criminal activity, you should be deported, right? You need strong borders. I'm a CIA officer, you need strong borders. We need an immigration policy that allows us to do that, but that enforcement would have been something that the average American supported. But the conduct of ICE in places like Minneapolis has now boomeranged to the point where people say, well, look, I was for enforcement, but I'm not for what looks like authoritarian style, federal goons on our streets. And that's not coming from Democrats. That's coming from, in Michigan, the state of Michigan voted for Donald Trump. It's coming from people who say, look, I'm all for enforcement, but I'm not for trampling basic rights. And Americans have an internal barometer for what looks and smells authoritarian, and whether it's shooting someone who's unarmed or pepper spraying kids or picking people up as they walk into Target and checking their papers, that is an internal barometer that we all have, that you have crossed. And we're here today, and all this firestorm is here, not because of people on the ground, but because of your behavior in ICE. And, I think when you extrapolate out and you listen to what the president and his cabinet are saying, I have to ask about our 2026 elections. Okay? The president says we should federalize our elections, even though the US Constitution was written by our founders to give that power to the states so that we would never have a president who took too much power and tried to become a king. He's tried to get voter rolls, including in my state. He's complained that elections aren't free and fair. In 2020, he came up with a playbook to deploy federal law enforcement around polling places, and the White House spokeswoman will not rule that out as of a month and a half ago. So I have to ask Mr. Lyons, do you believe that ICE has the authority to be deployed to U.S. polling places around the country?
So, ma'am, we're civil. Obviously, we do civil enforcement and criminal law enforcement. There's no reason for us to deploy to a polling facility.
So
No.
if the President of the United States gets Kristi Noem on the phone and she gets you on the phone and she says, we've heard there's a problem in Georgia or in Michigan or somewhere else, I need you to go and physically deploy around polling locations, you will say no.
There's no reason for us to deploy, ma'am.
Well, then you should say no, right?
Yes, but just point of clarification. Homeland Security investigations, we do investigate voter fraud, which we've made several arrests, most recently a high-profile one in Massachusetts. So later on—
That's very different than the physical intimidation.
I just didn't want you to say that we don't do anything with voter. I just want you to know we do that.
That's fine. I'm talking about something that I think would be extraordinary in American history, which is uniformed and masked ICE agents encircling polling places. And it's not fantasy, it's not made up. These are things that the president and his cabinet have suggested. They've suggested invoking the Insurrection Act, which would allow active duty military to do the very same thing. So this isn't, someone who thinks the sky is falling. The president and his cabinet are suggesting. So you're going to be the guy standing in the breach.
There's no reason, like I say, ma'am, there's no reason for you to use ICE officers in that.
Great. Well, I hope that in the privacy of that meeting, when that comes down and the president feels like he's going to lose the midterm elections, that you don't buckle. Because I think our democracy literally is dependent on it. Now, coupled with that, you've heard from a number of my colleagues about labeling people as domestic terrorists. What is the definition of a domestic terrorist?
So, ma'am, domestic terrorist is any organization that, on American soil, home nation soil, that's involved in acts of treason, acts of violence, active extremism against a group or against a country.
Okay, so actually in law, it's defined by the Patriot Act. That's the clearest place we have it. And it has to be tied to criminal activity,
Yes,
right?
ma'am.
So protesting, even if you don't like it, protesting of ICE agents, unarmed and without destroying property, is that a domestic terrorist?
No, ma'am. I stated under oath earlier that that's covered under the First Amendment right.
Great. So when, again, the president and Stephen Miller and others in the cabinet, including your boss, Kristi Noem, label people like Renee Good domestic terrorists, you understand why we can't trust what you're doing with the information you're collecting on these so-called domestic terrorists. So can you tell us under oath, does the Department of Homeland Security maintain a database of any kind of domestic terrorists? Are you collecting facial recognition information, license plates, locations, addresses, those kinds of information?
No, ma'am, and I testified under oath on Tuesday as well. I said the same thing. We don't have a database. If there is a case, a criminal case, that may involve some type of domestic terrorist organization, Homeland Security, as you know, Homeland Security investigation is involved across the board and embedded with the Joint Terrorism Task Force. We do conduct those, but there is no database, ma'am, for that.
Okay, or do you contribute data to anyone else's, any other federal agency's database?
No, ma'am.
Okay, so the fact that we have ICE agents saying out loud to people that they're trying to arrest or engage with that we're gonna put you into a database is just erroneous, they're making that up.
Yes, ma'am, I can't speak to why that officer said it, but we do not do that.
Well, I would just offer that given that the president put out an executive order in September and said he wants a list of domestic terrorist groups to use the full weight of the federal government to go against, you can imagine that people who are peaceful protesters feel like they are going to be targeted and feel that they are at risk. So I think the conduct of your agency has put us in a position where the average American doesn't know whether to trust law enforcement, and that is terrible and scary, given what law enforcement on the ground in our states do. And I would just say, if we do not have serious reform and change, then you will be contributing to the average American who woke up very supportive of law enforcement, being terrified that they and their community will be next. Yield back.
Thank you. We're almost at an end, and I think we've had a good hearing. I think a lot of knowledge came forward, and I sense at least the idea that you guys want to restore confidence in the agencies, and we'll work on that, and I hope that's true. With regard to the thing I mentioned before, I'm going to mention one more time as we end. The Attorney General says he will cooperate with final orders. You got a bunch of final orders. I would love to see you go for some specific people, that you send a letter to the Minneapolis police and say, will you help us? We need 10 policemen to go round up this guy. And then I'd like to see their response. And you should quote him from the hearing. He said he's for final orders. I think that's different than the policy he's been enforcing. So let's challenge him on that. Those are battles you can win. Those are political battles and public relations battles. Also, if you would send to my office specific times when you've been turned down. You've asked for requests. Everybody says they're not helping. I want to know that you're asking and being turned down. That should be publicized, and we're happy to publicize that. I think there are problems on both sides of the equation here, but the way we make them better is by making sure everybody knows about these things. But I do appreciate your cooperation in coming. I'd like to thank our witnesses for being here today. The record for this hearing will remain open until 5 p.m. on Friday, February 13th. 2026 for the submission of statements and questions for the record. The hearing is now adjourned.
This hearing was not just another policy disagreement. It revealed a deeper anxiety about the balance between national security and democratic restraint, a tension that has shaped American politics for decades, but feels especially sharp in moments of social and political stress. At the center of the exchange was concern over how immigration enforcement is carried out and how those tactics are perceived by the public. Strong borders and enforcement authority have long carried bipartisan support, in principle. But public confidence can shift quickly when enforcement appears to blur into intimidation or when ordinary civic spaces feel touched by federal power. That perception, whether universally shared or not, has real consequences for trust in government institutions. The questioning then moved to an even more sensitive issue, elections. By asking whether immigration agents could ever be deployed near polling places, the senator was probing the boundaries of federal authority. In a democracy built on decentralized voting power, the U.S. system intentionally separates election control across states to prevent national leaders from exerting direct pressure on the vote. Any suggestion of federal law enforcement presence around polling locations therefore carries historical weight far beyond a routine security question. Equally significant was the discussion about labeling individuals as domestic terrorists and the collection of personal data. In democratic societies, definitions of security threats must remain tightly bound to law because overly broad labels risk chilling lawful speech and protest. The exchange reflects a broader national struggle to define safety without undermining constitutional freedoms, one of the most persistent challenges in modern governance. For viewers, the importance of this moment lies in what it signals about public trust. When citizens begin to question whether enforcement agencies protect them or monitor them, confidence in the rule of law can erode from either direction: fear of crime on one side, fear of government overreach on the other. Stable democracies depend on navigating that narrow space carefully. That is why Capitol Lens follows hearings like this closely. Beyond the political intensity are fundamental questions about power, liberty, and the institutions meant to safeguard both. Stay informed, stay engaged, and keep watching the decisions that shape not only policy in Washington, but the everyday boundaries of freedom across the country.